Hey guys, GHAZZY TV here with another Path of Exile build guide video, and in this one, we're going to take the innovation of minion builds to a new level. We've seen cheerleader, champion, summoner builds, we've seen Pathfinder, Wraithlord builds, we've seen Necros and Guardians, but here is a chieftain, animate weapon, war cry support build. Yes, and it was so good that I even sold off all the gear on my high budget Sumancer character and decided to play this build all the way from low budget to medium high, and I even went for a mirror tier budget. This build will be seeing a written guide, which will be linked when it's ready in the descriptions down below. That written guide will obviously house the updated POBs, and that's where you're going to find all the POB for this build. However, let's talk about the build. So essentially, the build is obviously a Warcry character where you will be using Warcries on a consistent basis. These will be handled by having reduced cooldown recovery on your Warcries and supporting them by casting out the range of Warcries, which is basically going to be Enduring Cry, Rallying Cry, and Infernal Cry. These will make the weapons, and you or your minions will be giving extra damage based off the damage of your weapon, as well as getting for percent of physical as extra fire damage. And we're going to give everyone extra regeneration effect from Enduring Cry, but they do not get the endurance charges, but you do from the Enduring Cry. And this is handled in a very cool way by just spamming up these things, and we're keeping the cooldown down to a very low range, which allows us to consistently buff this range of minions, so this is also keeping them alive. And that's something an Animate weapon has always had historic problems with, and that is staying alive, which we're going to talk about with the skill tree in a bit, how we solve that. Leveling wise, I will say this in the early stages that you're going to run with a chieftain and just play with Sunder, and then switch when you're like level 68, 75, around that point in the end game after the campaign. You could even keep using Sunder all the way into like yellow tier maps even further if you so wish to, because it is so strong. So the build is essentially going to be casting a Bladefall, which allows you to generate lingering blades on the ground, which we are then using our Animate weapon to range them up, where they'll actually summon them from. And this really cool thing with this build is that you actually could play this with melee Animate weapon as well as ranged weapons. They're interchangeable with no other changes except for the support gems and the active skill gem. I will say this, I had the best comfortability and experience playing this with a ranged Animate weapon over the melee version, so do keep that in mind. Even though melee does pan out to have a theoretical higher single target DPS, the range just felt so much better to play with. And so when it comes to the button intensive approach, I do have another video coming out to you guys very soon, in which we are actually going to look at reducing the amount of buttons you're pressing and having a very lazy approach to the build. This build does not come with this feature. This build will be using 3 different Warcries, and every 1 minute or so, every 80 seconds, you'll be casting a couple of Bladefalls, and then combining that with the approach of spamming up some Animate weapon clicks to get your minions out. And then you have your mobility skill and convocation and a curse. So it is quite button intensive, but not as intensive as the cheerleaders. So do keep that in mind. It's a little bit smoother than that, but still, there's a lot of buttons to press. So if that's something that deters you from a build, do not play this character. But let's look at the PUB. The leveling wise, we are going to use Sunder. That means we're picking up nodes like the two-handed weapons nodes in general to just do more damage and go from that as you're leveling, and then switch over to this tree when you're playing off and switching over to the minion approach. We are going to be using Natural Authority. This allows us to have Warcry buff effects. We're going to be picking up as the Mountain for some extra blocking in the lower budget version, and running Blood Magic, which I'll go through the skills in a bit. We're going to be Elemental Ailment immune, and then just Life. And do keep in mind that we do want to run into a Lead by Example and Haunting Shout for Intimidation, as well as permanent having Onslaught for you and your minions. Minion-wise, however, like defense is pretty straightforward, just life endurance charges and max rest. But for the minions, it is very important that we pick up Decay Ward. This is to keep the Animate weapons alive. Like they said before, they do have an historic issue of not having any good survivability. So going for this is very attractive. We can get Convocation cooldown recovery, Enduring Bond for duration and damage, but don't forget the minion all max rest, as well as the Sacrifice node, very important here, as well as the Righteous Army for better defenses to our minions. Low budget wise, this is doing very, very well. The items used in this character is a simple Rebuke of the Vol. The shield could be any shield you feel like. You can use the Victorious, you can use the Dawnbreaker, or the Rise of the Phoenix is what we're using here, since we are indeed a chieftain with 86, 86, and then 87% resistances. Helmet, very straightforward, just life +2 to level of minion skills. Chest, same thing there, just get some life and rest. And armor, we're going to run a 4 red triad grip, which does not interfere with our sockets situations, as we're using 4 red sockets for our war cries. This allows us to convert all the damage into fire to further scale that damage output. Boots, simple +1 to fire rest, as well as rallying cry effect if you want to put some implicits, but mostly just aim for high life with movement speed and rest when needed. Jinx Juju helps us with more defenses. We're going to oil the Death Attunement for that extra Spectre. And we have Bone Ring, as well as an Unset Ring for Socket, with just generic stats and attributes where needed. Don't even have minion stats. There's a little bit of minion resist, which I would recommend keeping on the Bone Ring, unless you get another proper minion-related shield for this build in the low budget. And you would want to have a little bit of accuracy in your Ghastly Eye Jewels, preferably in the actual Darkness Enthroned. And that's about it. So it's a very cheap support setup for the build. And speaking of support, the Animate weapon, we have one version here for ranged and one version here for melee. The PUB is set to using ranged weapons, minion damage, elemental attacks, fast attacks, LE focus, and vicious projectile. Now we're switching fork for the faster attacks, I believe it is, for a single target. Versus clearing, you can use pierce, you can use chain, whichever you feel is more comfortable. I like the fork personally. Other than that, we are using a Chaos Golem for physical damage mitigation with Feeding Frenzy as well as a Convocation. We're running a 3-link setup with Arcanist's Brand for Desecrate and Spirit offering for more damage output. Spectre setup is a little special here. I'll talk about that last. The gloves will house the Rallying and Enduring and Infernal Cry together with Urgent Orders to make those speedy war cries up so they don't really feel interfering or feel clunky to use as you're playing. So you'll be casting these every time they're off cooldown, which should be about every 5 seconds. And we have a Purity of Elements linked with Eternal Blessing, and then you're going to have a Bladefall linked with Spell Cascade, which is actually set to be a 2-link. And the Unset Ring houses the Elemental Weakness. Spectre and Animate Guardian wise, we're running a very simple setup with the Animate Guardian. You can later on use explodey setups with this, of course, but for now we're going to use the simple Leercast Dying Breath, very cheap stuff. This will be available in the guide, of course, and it's seen in the item section here on the Animate Guardian. We could use a Dread Arc setup with this as well. It's all depending on how you want to play the Animate Guardian. There's a lot of different options, but we're going to have minion life and then, of course, a mobility, in this case being the Frost Blink. In the PUB, you'll see here in purple text, I'm using a Hulking Miscreation. This is a perfect Hulking Miscreation that you get from Ritual Corpses. And in the Spectre config setup beneath the bar here, do it that way. Spectre config setup is basically using one of the Spectres being a perfect Guardian Turtle and one Spectral Leader. This is to ease up the casting of your own Bladefall as well as Animate Weapon Summoning to keep that thing less of an interference and clunky feeling to the build, just making it smoother this way. There are other better options, but this is the one that felt the best to play with. The build's pretty tanky, can take quite a big beating considering the low budget this specific PUB is showing. We're killing all the bandits. We're running Solo Lunaris, Solo Girthcool as the Pantheons, and that kind of summarizes the entire low budget approach. I've been having a blast with this. You can definitely league start this character. It does extremely well. It's smooth to play, and it just transitions very effectively. And then you can upgrade it very, very easily as well. And it does high endgame content. I did push this build in a higher medium budget version into doing tier 17s. There's some mods you want to stay away from because you're playing minions. So there's always some mods that are very scary. But this build actually does tier 17 quite effectively. So let's move over and look at the medium budget version, which is packing about 38 million Shaper DPS. Awakened gems across the board on with the cheap ones at least. Again, we're using ranged Animate weapons is the one I preferred. And there's some awakened gems. Most of these are very, very cheap. And tree-wise gets a few alterations, but mostly it's just adding a large cluster and cutting points to fit this. We were aiming for a 35% effect with 3% attack cast speed, which is very important. The mana is completely irrelevant. You'd prefer to see a life roll. If you get another suffix, you can go for resistances, chaos resistance, or attributes, or all attributes, and that would be a much better choice. So that's the tree changes. Gear-wise, we're running into a Defiance of Destiny for even better layers of defense. As you can see here, Defiance of Destiny doesn't really calculate very well with PUB, but without the Defiance of Destiny, we're still sitting at 28,000 max fist hit, 67 LE hit, and it's just really, really good. We're running a Cloak of Flame, cheap approach. We can get these corrupted for the medium budget, and we're now using a Winds of Fate. Now, the reason we're using this over something like Moroi Urki is because we actually want the block that we get from the Winds of Fate, which is very important for this type of budget. Other than that, the gear remains the same. We're running a Roomies. There's a Watcher's Eye with Determination, physical damage mitigation, and if you can get with extra block, that would be preferable to help with a little bit more block chance. You don't really need that much. It's mostly so you don't get insta-hit by everything that shoots your way. And that's kind of it. The higher buddy version, now it starts to get a little bit crazier. We're going to run a Lethal Pride, for example. This Lethal Pride is picked up down here to give its Warcry buff effect, which is really, really cool on these notables, which is increasing the efficiency of the build quite drastically. And that's the main difference on top of having corrupted modifiers, having double corrupted Cloak of Flame. This is basically the changes that we go from medium into high. It's just corruptions, better numerical values, and smacking in the Lethal Pride. Even the large cluster is now sitting on actually having life and chaos rest, for example, and the damage is then going higher as well as a result of these changes. Then obviously there is a mirror tier version where you can actually use the classical mirror helmet that we made this lead that we've been using for the Stewmancer, and this is where things get really crazy because you can push up to 146 million Shaper DPS with your ranged animate weapons. Absolutely insane. You can get even higher if you want to make a glass cannon out of this. Obviously not needed, but this is where we use that helmet. This is not something I would recommend anyone to play, but I wanted to show that it is possible while still having a 45,000 max fist hit defensive layer. It is absolutely crazy what you can do with this build. I've been having a blast playing this, and I hope you will have fun with it as well, despite it being button intensive. But that's all I got for you today with this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And yeah, we're very close to 100,000 subscribers. So if you want to support the channel, support the stream and the YouTube channel, just do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment down below what you guys think of this specific build. And I'll see you guys in the next one. So till then, as always, stay safe, keep rocking.